Welcome to the Create More Value podcast, sponsored by Fortuna Advisors, the boutique shareholder value improvement advisory firm. Create More Value is a series of conversations with senior executives, board members, investors, and other experts that have overcome challenges to create exceptional value for their companies. There are many ways to drive value, so we cover a wide range of topics. I am the host, Greg Milano, founder and CEO of Fortuna Advisors, and I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. I would like to welcome Ken Fisher. Thank you, Ken, for joining me on our Fortuna Advisors podcast, Create More Value.
Thanks, Greg. Great to be here. Appreciate you inviting me. And I'd also like to remember and thank you for all the work you've done for me in the past at Noble Energy and ChampionX.
Oh.
You and your team have definitely helped us create a lot of value.
Well, I appreciate that. That's very nice of you to say. And so that's, over and above. Appreciated. So Ken is EVP and Chief Financial Officer of ChampionX Corporation, a leading global oilfield chemicals, equipment, and service provider. In April, SLB, formerly known as Schlumberger, announced the pending acquisition of ChampionX. Before serving as ChampionX CFO, Ken was the Executive Vice President and CFO of Noble Energy, a global exploration and production company, for 11 years. Prior to Noble Energy, Ken held a number of senior leadership roles in Shell, including EVP of Finance for Upstream Americas, CFO of the U.S. Downstream Business, and Director of Strategy and Business Development for the Royal Dutch Shell Group in The Hague. Ken began his career in GE on the financial management program after graduation from the University of Notre Dame. His GE leadership roles included Vice President and CFO of GE Engine Services and Director of Finance and Business Development for GE Plastics Asia. In the board arena, Ken has previously served on the board of ChampionX as Audit Committee Chair and as Board Chair of Noble Midstream Partners. Ken, with your wide range of experiences in oil and gas, what did you learn that you could not have learned in say, one vertical?
That's a good question, Greg. I think in general, it probably goes beyond just oil and gas, but I think my career definitely benefited from the fact that I've had the opportunity to work in a number of different industries and in a sense, investment segments, industrial, energy, petrochemicals. And I think what you learn is it really, I think, hones your diagnostic skills, your abilities to quickly walk into a situation, make an assessment, and identify what's going right and doesn't need much attention, and where there's opportunity or challenges that need to be addressed, and where there's a lot of leverage. So I think it's great experience to work in long cycle businesses, short cycle businesses, and businesses that are in an upswing or growth mode versus things that need maybe some restructuring. And if you do that early in your career, I think it really helps, as I said, hone your diagnostic skills. In the energy business, it's a value chain, and so the understanding of what goes on in refining or downstream versus how midstream or pipeline operators and processors make money versus the upstream, the producers. If you understand the various parts of the value chain, you can actually then use that to help unlock more opportunity or insight that you can bring to bear to improve your own whatever segment you're in. So to me, acquiring diverse experiences and being able to bring those to bear to a situation is a big leverage point.
Yeah, I think that's great advice for people. So tell me about your experiences when GE sent you to Singapore as Director of Finance and Business Development of their Asia Pacific plastics business.
Yeah, well, it was relatively early in my career, and I was definitely not ready for it. It was a big, in a sense, promotion to a bigger role. It was a portfolio of businesses in that it operated as in each individual geography throughout Asia. It was obviously a huge land mass or ocean mass that you had to cover, and we had businesses that were growing like crazy in China, and businesses in Japan that needed to be restructured. So it was really a crash course in being a CFO. And
Mhm.
I think a couple of the things that I really took away from that were you've got to treat growth businesses differently than restructuring businesses. You've got to,
Mhm.
one size does not fit all. You've got to look at the situation in a given, portfolio company or part of your operation and, identify how that business needs to be managed to be successful. And,
Mhm.
in the case of China, we couldn't resource fast enough. And we really just had to continue to, in a sense, pour resources in. We built the whole first wholly owned plastics compounding wholly foreign owned plastics compounding plant in China. We opened a major distribution center in Hong Kong. This was before the handover. And so it
Mhm.
was all about resourcing in China. Whereas in Japan, it was an issue of a business that the capacity was too great for the demand and a lot of restructuring, a lot of tough activity. But you had to
Mhm.
treat, each one in a sense uniquely to drive the right outcome for the total portfolio.
Yeah, that's a great experience. I mean, I think many people either get the experience of dealing with growth businesses or turnaround businesses, but getting both at the same time is really great because you do encounter them both, of course, from time to time. So, Shell, for decades, has been a very well known company in terms of its prowess in strategy development. So, your role in strategy at Shell is really very impressive. How did you change the strategy development and planning processes at Shell?
Yeah, it's a interesting question. I think, and you, in a way, you said it. Shell historically was noted for strategy development, not
Hmm.
always strategy execution. And a lot of times, strategies would change quickly, and
Uh-huh.
there'd be a reset. And so I happened to serve in the role at kind of a important time in Shell's history in that in 2004 there was the so-called oil and gas reserves issue, and in terms of SEC reporting that led to some leadership changes and other changes within the organization. And so Jeroen van der Veer became the CEO, and he unified Shell from what was previously to a joint venture structure to a unified structure. And he became the first true CEO, Chief Executive Officer of Shell. And so, not long after that, I had the opportunity to do the strategy drop at the group level. And what we really tried to concentrate on was how do we not only develop strategy, but how do we drive execution of that strategy? And so, and it was about, okay, looking at each of the businesses in the portfolio, working with them to how do they, what is their strategy and how does it align with the group strategy? What are their opportunities set? What are their issues? And make those opportunities and issues much more transparent, and then to get alignment around what we called at the time aspired portfolio. What didn't we not have that we needed? And
Hmm.
were those organic opportunities that had to be, gone and captured, or was it M&A type of thing? And
Hmm.
so I think, the thing I would say, we really tried to drive a much more intense focus on business performance and issues,
Hmm.
and making sure that people were, addressing the things that needed to be addressed, and at the same time getting alignment and resourcing to work the aspired portfolio uh, in terms of business development. And I learned a lot, and it was a stretch for me in a sense that I wasn't a strategist, but
Hmm.
by background. And but what I learned was it's usually best to keep your strategy short and simple and focus on execution.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think, I mean, my experience having been a consultant now for over 3 decades is very consistent in terms of the number of companies I've worked with that are, skilled at developing strategies, it's, assessing a situation, looking for opportunities, assessing the competitive landscape, and so forth. But it's like once that's written, it's like they're done. And actually, it's the execution where it usually falls apart. And so, yeah, that effort you had there was probably really well received and really effective. So, the next topic I want to ask you about is something that's very near and dear to my heart based on all of my years of working with economic profit and so forth. But I've noticed that I've worked with you at several companies now, and I've noticed that your teams manage working capital better than most companies, and which is really great. But how have you achieved this? What are the things you've done to prioritize working capital and make this happen? And what do you see as the benefits to the company of managing working capital efficiently?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think probably having grown up in an industrial business, I learned a lot about working capital early. And GE, one of the ways we drove performance was really to get much more attention on cash. And so what I learned from that, and I've tried to really apply everywhere I've been since then, is it's not only about income or the income statement, but it's also about working capital and the balance sheet. And in
Hmm.
my mind, they're equally important. So I probably spend at least actually I probably spend more time on working capital and the balance sheet in terms of driving performance than than necessarily on revenue and the income statement many
Hmm.
times. And
Wow.
at Champion X, we quickly got after working capital as we were a product of a spin from Dover Corporation and then the merger with our chemicals business. And both of those businesses operated as part of a bigger company. And so they didn't have any, they didn't need to worry about cash per se because
Hmm.
the group treasurer took care of that. But,
Hmm.
my focus was all right, we need to be really attentive to cash. And as we looked at the cash conversion cycle, accounts payable, receivable, inventory netted, across, we had 120 plus day cash conversion cycle. And so
Hmm.
we benchmarked and looked hard at it, and we managed to drive that to about 60 plus days. So almost cut
Hmm.
it in half. I mean,
Hmm.
that freed up essentially about $400 million. So, and that's if you can maintain that, it's a permanent reduction in your investment in your business,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
your return denominator goes down, right? So
Yeah.
it's a big leverage point, and it's not magic. We simply appointed global process owners, one for credit, one for collections, one's for accounts payable, and then put in place a sales and operational planning process for our inventory,
Hmm.
and which was a bit at first an unnatural act, but we made those things work. We look at cash balance every day. We literally publish an email with collections by customer and past dues by customer daily. We have a lot of focus on inventory and have really learned how to operationalize the sales and operational planning process.
Hmm.
And then we track accounts payable reliability, and you know can we cycle the payments processing on time so they're positioned to pay properly, and
Hmm.
then are we paying as we expect from a reliability standpoint. And what we've learned from that is not only have we improved working capital performance, but we've learned a lot about how our business operates,
Hmm.
how effectively we serve customers, how effectively we manage logistics, how
Hmm.
effective we are, in terms of level loading demand to make it more efficient in the factories.
Hmm.
All these, we've learned so much that we can apply to the business from a continuous improvement standpoint. So
Hmm.
if you don't know what your working capital is, you're missing a big opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just going to go back to one of my earlier episodes with Scott Morrison, the former CFO of Ball Corporation. He talked about acquisitions and would say that after making an acquisition, they would streamline working capital, and it was like getting a discount on the purchase price. You
Absolutely.
still had all the
Absolutely.
EBITDA, but you got money back right
Yeah.
out of the gate by just reducing inventory and.
And the beauty of it, the beauty of it at this point is like when we started all this, 4 years ago, I was had to be heavily involved in every, I mean, I was chasing customer receivables myself
Hmm.
in a sense
Hmm.
to understand what was happening and to train people. Now, like, we just finished third quarter and I don't have to get involved because
Hmm.
the team now, our global collections leader, our sales force, all the folks that work in those areas, they get it, right. They
Hmm.
get that.
Hmm.
I want to collect my bills on. I want to issue an accurate and timely invoice, and I want to collect my bills on time.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
machine now operates much better, more reliably, and efficiently.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great. And I think you need to think about it just like you think about cost efficiency, right? Because it's the cost of capital is
Exactly.
just like any other cost. So, so your career with all the different things that you've done developed you well for the challenges one faces as a public company CFO. What was it like when you first actually became a public company CFO? What was the experience like to be in that role?
Well, I think I was probably pretty well prepared for it because I'd done a lot of finance jobs, business finance type roles in my career. I'd had a lot of M&A experience, either directly, leading business development or indirectly as the finance guy. I'd had the opportunity in Shell to do some investor relations when I was leading the fuels development and biofuels activities, and I'd served on some joint venture boards and seen the Shell, rolled that Shell board in action. So I think I kind of understood the board dynamics enough. So
Hmm.
to me, it was not that great a transition because I think I'd been either lucky or somewhat fortuitous in how how my career evolved.
Hmm.
But one
Hmm.
thing I think, you've got to be able to deal with investors, and that's a big, and it can be a big time commitment that like
Hmm.
is new. You got to run the business and you got to deal with investors, and then
Yeah.
it's also, I think, important to really have a good understanding and relationship with the board, and
Hmm.
for a CFO, particularly with your audit committee chairman.
Let me touch on some of the things you just mentioned more specifically, because I think that each of them is a different facet. And I agree with you completely. Lots of people become public company CFOs and are missing some of these experiences, and they are new. But so let's start with M&A. M&A can be very challenging. There's been a lot of research showing that companies doing acquisitions often buy good companies, but they pay too much, so the deal winds up being dilutive to their shareholder value and other things. Uh, what advice do you have to help others be effective with M&A?
Well, I think you have to work at it. To me, you've got to have a machine. So you need to understand, like as I said, the Shell aspired portfolio. What do you want to add to your business?
Hmm.
I also think you need to get rid of stuff, as we used to say in Shell, cut the tail, prune. And so
Hmm.
I think if you're always looking at your portfolio and pruning, the less well performing, that means you're in a sense doing the inverse of M&A, or
Hmm.
acquisitions, and so you can learn a lot from that. Frankly, divestments are, you need to get good at divestments too.
Hmm.
And then, what is your aspire portfolio? What are the targets? I think you have to look at them constantly, and at the
Hmm.
same time be very patient, because usually there's a time to buy something and there's a time not to buy things. And
Hmm.
so your timing is can be very important. So in order to do timing well, you need to be prepared all the time,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and and at the same time you need to get used to no, right, or not now.
All
And
right.
so discipline is key. And then, practice. One thing I learned in the lean environment and continuous improvement was the more you practice things, the more cycles you get, the better. If you're thinking about improving, you can actually improve because you're getting
Yeah.
more cycles in. So,
Hmm.
and I think you can see that historically in some companies were really good acquisition machines, and that's because they practiced and
Yeah.
they got good at it. But in my sense, it's another thing. You learn a lot. Hopefully, get if early in your career, get exposed to as much investments or divestments as you can, because it gives you a really good experience that you then need to apply, as a business leader.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and just our research that we've published somewhat and also done bespoke research for clients totally agrees with what you just said. In almost every industry, we find companies that do more frequent acquisitions tend to be better acquirers. They tend to have better
Yeah,
TSR. The occasional big blockbuster deal is there's just too much risk because you don't have the
it's too
skill
much
set
risk. Exactly.
and there's
Yeah,
I mean there are cases where it works, but it's more likely to be less
yeah, I
less
agree.
good of
The
an
other
outcome.
thing I've learned is, if you're selling, sell fast.
Hmm.
If you want to get rid of it, go get rid of it. Don't don't try for the perfect investment. And then at the
Hmm.
same time, I think if you're a buyer, it's sometimes good to be slow.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
one thing I learned from a guy named Al Cerruti in the GE world was due diligence is a source of value. You don't, it's not just, okay, check the box and it's okay or
Hmm.
not okay.
Right, right.
It's a source of understanding the business and where value can, be harvested once you own it,
Hmm.
or
Right,
be in the deal process. How do you structure the deal process to get a better deal? And so
right,
if you
right,
know
right.
more about the target than the seller, you're probably going to do better.
Yeah, yeah, and it also is the segue into the execution after you do the deal, which
Exactly.
just
Yes.
like
It,
just
in a
like we
sense, it
discussed
sets
before.
up the
Yeah,
integration and execution.
which is just as important as it was before when we discussed strategy development too. So another area that you mentioned is investor relations, and you had some experience being exposed to investors before you became a public company CFO. Many don't, but even for you, there's a difference between supporting the process of dealing with investors and being exposed to them and being the sort of the guy in the seat as CFO. Were there any tough situations that you faced when you first started being a CFO facing public investors? How did you deal with the different challenges that came up? And I guess what kind of advice do you have to others that are stepping into that
Yeah.
category?
No, I mean, I think, as you get into the CFO seat, you better, I think, do two things. One, better make sure you make enough time to 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 support the IR process, right? Hopefully, you have a good IR person, you have a good CEO.
Hmm.
Hopefully, people share the load of that, activity. I've always been lucky in a sense that I've always had good IR people to
Hmm.
work with, and and good CEOs that help share the load. So I think that's a key thing. And then the second thing, as you step into that type of a role, is you got to be totally credible. Yeah, I mean, you got to be transparent and credible, and people you have to build trust with the investor community.
Hmm.
You need to do what you say. You need to know your business and lay it out clearly. In my personal view, is it's good to acknowledge poor performance or a miss. I mean, to me, I find it a lot more credible when management teams say, yeah, I mean, that didn't go well, or that's not what we wanted, or I'm
Hmm.
unhappy about that, and we're going to address it. We're on top of it. We're dealing with it. So to me, that credibility, transparency, and credibility is key. Uh, and then another, I don't think you need to, like this. Even though the stock price is your scorecard, right? I think, at least in my view, that there's other things that can make that move around at all. So to me, it comes back to really get a good strategy and execute against it, and execute, and drive value. And, in a sense, keep your head down and stay the course. It's about I'm here to deliver value. I know how to deliver value. I'm going to execute and deliver that value. And, the stock price in a way will take care of itself.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. The focus is on growing the intrinsic value of the organization, and over time, the share price will catch up. You're right, even if it
Yeah.
doesn't always get there, on day one. I'm kind of a student of business models, and I like to think about, what is the nature of the business model of my clients, and how does it deliver value. And one thing that you spoke to me about recently, you said that when you were at the GE aircraft engine unit, the strategy shifted toward being more of a parts business. And so I wanted to just explore that slightly. Why did that happen? And what was the impact of that?
Yeah, I mean, that was a really interesting and great learning experience. But when I went back to aircraft engines as the CFO for the engine services business, I'd been away, 4 or 5 years. And as when I came back, that, services or the aftermarket was the key. It had always been the key profit driver, but now it was also the key growth driver. And it
Hmm.
was, it was, by far, in a sense, the biggest business we had. And the prior team had adopted a strategy. I guess I would call it a storefront strategy, where they had acquired overhaul shops from a bunch of airlines and commercial operators around the world, and built up this big engine overhaul business with the intent to pull through the parts and the component repair where all the profitability was.
Hmm.
And I got there, I looked at the business, and the overhaul business was a very low margin business, in a sense, wrench turning and not a lot of
Hmm.
margin. And then I looked at the inventory and receivables, and like, ugh, this is not good.
Hmm.
Back to the working capital point. And so it became clear that it was a low margin and high working capital business that was diluting the overall services returns. And it was clear. And then the CEO changed. George Oliver, who now runs Johnson Controls, took over. And he looked at the data. We talked. He went away one weekend. He came back and he said, "And it's the material, stupid." and uh, and that was in the at the time was a famous Bill Clinton
Yeah,
line about the economy.
the economy.
But,
Yeah.
but George was right on, and it was we made all our money on materials. And so, why are we messing around with this overall business? So, we quickly shifted strategy to say, okay, we're going to de emphasize overall. And in fact, if we can get out of some of it, we will. And
Hmm.
we'll sign, in a sense, branded materials deals for people to do their overall themselves, or to, there were some people that wanted to be in the overall business because they were interested in employing a lot of people. And
Hmm.
so,
Hmm.
we did deals to, to create that materials offering where
Hmm.
you were buy our spare parts, you would do our component repair technology in your facility, or you'd buy our component repairs.
Hmm.
And then we added a whole new business line, which was used parts. And so,
Hmm.
we de-emphasized the business, back to portfolio management in a sense, right? We de-emphasized and decapitalized the overall business, and really put the resources and focus where we made the most money. And
Hmm.
it was really a significant turnaround, and a good a good driver of value.
Yeah, that's great. That's really, really great. And that shift, I mean, being able to see the differences in profitability and then contemplate how to execute a shift in strategy like that is something that it seems so obvious when you describe it like this, but yeah, we've seen a lot of companies really struggle with that. It's hard to take, you're now doing this and you want to do that. It's hard sometimes to get that focus shift because everybody's so used to just doing what they've been doing. The momentum, is
Well,
hard
that's
to.
one thing I learned. It's one thing I picked up in my GE days, and I think it probably goes back to Jack Welch. But Jack was really, really good at if you were doing a strategy review covering a business with multiple sub businesses, on one page he'd be, hey, you need to add 500 people to that business and go grow that business. Go, 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 go.
Mhm.
And then 3 pages later, he'd say, get out of that dog. Right. And he was very good at, like, okay, you can win here and you're not going to win here no matter how hard you try. So,
Mhm.
let's get after it. And then, if once you made the decision, go execute with speed, and intensity.
Mhm. Mhm. That's great. I'm going to ask you just one more question. And I mean, this is really, we've covered some of this already in all the different topics you've covered. But so, what advice do you have for folks that are maybe earlier in their career that work in finance at companies that want to someday be a public company CFO? What should they be doing to build their ability to someday make that leap?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think probably luck has a lot to do with it, at least in this case. So, uh, the blind squirrel finds the acorn, maybe. I don't know. But
Ever humble.
I think, to me, one is try and do as many business finance jobs as you can.
Hmm.
Get with the business and be the business support, the business finance guy for a business. And
Hmm.
back to the earlier point, get growth experiences, get some restructuring experiences, so the bandwidth of what you may face,
Hmm.
because things can change quickly sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think go get that kind of experience. For me, I was more interested in autonomy on my job and the ability to contribute versus visibility, because
Hmm.
some people are all concerned, I want visibility, but no, no, no. Sometimes it's good to go somewhere far away, or in a more remote thing, and you have more
Hmm.
autonomy to make things happen yourself. And
Hmm.
you learn from that autonomy, which then comes with the responsibility. And then,
Hmm.
have a ultimately, it's have a positive impact, right? If I mean Because people who do hard things well, they get more hard things to do. You
Yeah.
know, you
Yeah.
you they you get rewarded with a bigger, more challenging job. Uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
I was a trainee. My first role in the company on the financial management program was cost accumulation in a factory. And it was like, that was on the social food chain in finance. It was way below FP&A, or it was even below
Hmm.
cost accounting. It was just cost accumulation. But what
Hmm.
I figured out was that the price variance I was booking per month for this old product line was like a material number in the total earnings of the company.
Hmm.
And then I realized, like, okay, we're booking a lot of negative variance here. And oh, by the way the contract is structured with the supplier, it's negatively levered to volume, or levered to volume, and we're on a declining volume curve. So this is only going to get worse. So I went
Hmm.
over and
Hmm.
visited with the procurement guys and explained this to them. And we went and resourced the product line, and we made a lot more money.
Hmm.
And then the sales guys said, well, this is an old product line, we'll reduce the price so we can sell more. And I got really excited, like, that's a dumb idea. And I told them that it was, actually, I was a little rude about it, but I said it was dumb, and they got mad at me. But so I crunched all the data, and sure enough, I mean, there was no way by dropping price you were going to ever replace that in a dying product line with volume,
Hmm.
upside. And so I ended up going and talking to the head of marketing, and he listened to me, and
Hmm.
you know they didn't do it. So I mean, I'd been on the job probably less than 9 months, and I'd had a good impact on that product line. And in fact, it was funny that nobody would do anything about that product line anymore and say, did you go talk to Fisher, right?
Hmm.
So I effectively, in a way, became the mini product manager. And even though I was a trainee, and what that really taught me was have a positive impact.
Hmm.
Context
Yeah.
is important, right? What are you doing? Do you care? What's the context of what you're doing, and how do you put that in the bigger picture? so you understand, is this a leverage item or not? Right?
Hmm.
Because if you're not
Hmm.
working on leverage items, you probably got to change what you're doing. And then if you have a positive impact, it doesn't matter what level you are. I mean, companies want to be successful. So if you're having a good impact, typically, that's good for your career. So
Hmm. Yeah,
it
yeah,
was a
for
good
sure.
good early lesson, and so I've just always tried, from the finance chair to have a positive impact.
Well, that's a really great answer, and I guess we're going to wrap it up there. We've been speaking with Ken Fisher. Thank you, Ken, so much for joining me for this really important conversation.
Thanks, Greg. It's been a pleasure.
You have been listening to Create More Value, sponsored by Fortuna Advisors, and I am your host, Greg Milano, founder and CEO of Fortuna Advisors. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Fortuna Advisors helps companies with strategy, capital deployment, business management, corporate culture, and incentive compensation, all aimed at driving top quartile total shareholder return and the equivalent for private companies. To learn more, contact us at info@fortuna-advisors.com.